Good afternoon. Today, the Sub-Appropriations Committee for the State and Local Transportation will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll for today's attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Steele.
Here.
Representative Slaw. Representative Borton.
Here.
Representative DeSena.
Here.
Representative Robinson.
Present.
Representative Morgan.
Here.
Representative Edwards. Madam Chair, you have 5 of 7 members. You have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. Representative Robinson moves to adopt the minutes of the March 16th meeting. There being no objections, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. Okay, today's committee was called to discuss ports and freight rail. The discussion will provide insights from the Michigan Department of Transportation along with the Michigan Railroad Association. So the first up will be Peter Anster and Alicia Wolf. Okay, Peter is from the Director of Rail and Alicia is from, or is it Elijah?
It's Alicia, you're right.
Alicia, Freight Policy Specialist with the Department of Transportation, who will be discussing and the overview of Michigan's maritime and rail freight systems, the current, number 2, current state and future needs, and 3, the federal and state funding opportunities. And so with that little overview, if you guys would like to start, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Sure, and good afternoon. We're just so pleased to be here, and I often like to say to folks that I do the modes, not the roads, so it's fun to be able to work on some different aspects of transportation and share those things with you today. So as we well know, the maritime system in Michigan is very essential to the transportation system and the overall economy of Michigan. So we have 33 active cargo ports. You can see there on the map to the right, and they're shown by the amount of tonnage that's handled at the ports, the red being the most tonnage and down to the yellow being...
Sorry, I don't know if your mic's on or if you're close enough or one of or
How's
both.
that?
Okay.
Is that
I don't
better?
know yet.
Very good. So the ports in Michigan handle approximately 46.1 million tons of cargo annually, and that's valued at around $9 million. And overall, that makes up about 9% of the state's freight tonnage and 1% of the state's freight value carried by waterborne commerce. So the maritime system is pretty unique in that it's a partnership between public and private sectors. The federal government generally maintains the infrastructure by way of congressionally authorized navigation channels, and the private sector provides access to those channels, dredges to those public channels, provides the vessels and the marine terminals at their ports. So here you can see the top commodities that's moved by the water, and this is broken out by inbound, outbound, and within Michigan. So overall, you really see with waterborne commerce, they're carrying bulk materials. So it's high weight, generally low value, salt, stone, coal, these types of bulk commodities carried on the water. And what we've seen over the year, though you can see projected out to 2050, there's a slight increase in tons and value. We have seen a somewhat steady decrease in water cargo over the year, and we think that's due to less coal, and the ports are certainly able to accommodate more. They have a capacity to handle more. We hear that consistently from them. So they're working, with the state agencies, with MEDC, to connect to new markets, to move new types of commodities and take advantage of that capacity that they have at the ports. So essentially, you see the main movements being inbound coal and salt. We also see limestone sent outbound and within Michigan from the quarries in northern Michigan, and cement from Alpena and Charlevoix, and metallic ore pellets from Marquette. Those are the main moves that we see on the water in Michigan. So with the exception of the Detroit Wayne County Port Authority, all of those 33 ports in Michigan and marine terminals are privately owned and operated, so they do generate their own revenue, but outside of that, the only funding that the ports receive are through state and federal grants. So on the state side, I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about our Michigan Maritime and Port Facility Assistance Grant Program, but the ports have also applied for and received funding from various grant programs through EAGLE and MEDC as well. On the federal side, the main port-dedicated grant program is called the Port Infrastructure Development Grant Program. That's operated out of the Maritime MARAD administration. And something that the American Great Lakes Port Association has been advocating for is more of those funds to go toward Great Lakes projects. So when they looked at the overall life of that program over the last 5 years, only 8% of those funds went to Great Lake ports. So that's something we're really interested in, their work in that space and making sure more of those dollars do come to Great Lakes ports, though the Port of Detroit has been awarded, Port of Monroe, and Charlevoix last year, and that round of funding was awarded. So we have seen a few, but we'd of course love to see more and compete with the East Coast ports more competitively. Of course, continued funding for the new SULAC in Michigan is critically important to the state of Michigan and the overall economy in the nation. And one of the other things that we've been actively working on is a Michigan Maritime Strategy for the state of Michigan. This came out of a co-funded effort between MDOT, EAGLE, and MEDC that we have what we call a Michigan Maritime Work Group that we all meet regularly to talk about different maritime initiatives and projects that we have going on. And it was very clear that we all were working in similar spaces and we needed to have more strategic direction in some of the activities that we're involved in. So we co-funded and brought on the University of Michigan to help us develop this strategy. It's just started. A few weeks ago, we held a stakeholder workshop in Ann Arbor and had a very broad, diverse representation from maritime stakeholders. So we're really happy to be moving forward with the strategy and think it'll be a really great opportunity to align some of our state efforts and regional efforts in the maritime space. I mentioned MDOT's Maritime and Port Facility Assistance Program. This was created out of Senate Bill 744 that was passed in 2022. It was appropriated one-time funding in 2024 in our fiscal year 24 budget for a $5 million one-time earmark to fund that grant program. And we were able to award 5 maritime projects that were focusing on strengthening economic competitiveness, reducing the cost of freight transportation, improving reliability, and mitigating the impact of freight movement on the environment through the maritime space. And 2 of those biggest awards were to the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority for an innovation terminal where they'll be able to host startup companies and actually own and operate their own terminal, whereas they don't have ownership of a terminal at their port currently. And the other large award was to the Port of Monroe for a roll-on, roll-off dock to be able to handle more diverse and unique cargo opportunities. So this program helped leverage over $25 million in investment, and we received 12 applications requesting over $17 million in funding. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Peter.
Thanks, Alicia. So I'm Peter Annister. I'm the Director of Rail at MDOT, and we work both with freight rail and then also on the passenger rail side with Amtrak. And I wanted to first note that today's Go Orange Day, and I had to wear an orange tie, and that's a day where we try to raise awareness for transportation worker safety. So it's a big day at MDOT as we kind of move into construction season here, and just wanted to note my orange tie and honor that. For our freight rail system in Michigan, there's a map up here. It's a little bit hard to read, but I think you get a little bit of a flavor. We have about 3,600 miles of rail in Michigan, and primarily that rail is owned by private railroads. Michigan, we do own about 665 miles of that 3,600 miles of rail. Our ownership is, if you look kind of the 2 lines that are going up in the middle of the state, Those are state-owned rail, and then we have a few other low-density rail lines kind of across the state that we own, as well as our what we call the Michigan line, which is the track that handles our Wolverine Amtrak service between Dearborn and Kalamazoo, Michigan. But generally speaking, most of the rail you see in the state of Michigan is owned and operated by private railroads. It's operated by 29 railroads here in Michigan. 4 are termed as Class 1 railroads, so those are the big railroads you hear about: Norfolk Southern, CSX, Canadian National, and then CPKC are all operating here in Michigan. We also have 24 short line railroads, so these are regional railroads that also own and operate within our state. Those are groups like Watco and Genesee and Wyoming Railroad, a couple of our larger short line railroads here in Michigan. And then Amtrak is also an operator here in Michigan. So that's our 29th railroad, and they operate and maintain the passenger rail lines that they service here in Michigan. Our freight system does host 3 of our passenger rail routes. So we have passenger rail from Grand Rapids to Chicago that mainly runs on CSX-owned railway. Our Blue Water route, which runs from Port Huron to Chicago, operates on CN and Norfolk Southern. And then the Wolverine and Detroit area operates on several different railroads. So basically all of that passenger rail service here in Michigan and throughout the country typically operates on freight-owned railroads that we term host railroads, essentially. So that partnership is really key to making sure we have success in moving freight and people. We also have 4,800 public at-grade railroad crossings in our state. So that we do regulate those from my office as well. We inspect all of those each year just to ensure that they're safe and operating as intended. And then we also have 3 international border crossings that utilize rail. There's a CPKC tunnel in Detroit. CN has a tunnel in Port Huron. And then up in the Sioux, there's also a crossing that goes across between Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. A little picture of Michigan's freight rail network. So you'll see on the right is a map of rail tons, and the larger the line on that network is the more freight that's moved on those lines. So the big one that runs kind of from Port Huron down to the Indiana border there is CN's main line that they use to really connect their operations in Canada to Chicago and then down south. And then the line on the west coast is CSX that kind of runs along the lakeshore there. And then Norfolk Southern and Conrail operates mostly in southeast Michigan. So a lot of investment there. You'll see our tonnage. We've got fairly close to inbound and outbound as far as what we move here in Michigan. We also move about 5.3 million tons of rail just within the state of Michigan, or with tons within the state of Michigan. And then you also see that throughput, that 27.5 million. So that's, rail that's, a lot of that's probably that CN that comes from Canada and connects down to the rail networks in Michigan and then in Chicago and areas south. If you want to look at the commodities, inbound, our top commodity is coal. And like Alicia mentioned on the maritime side, that has been reducing over time as our energy mix changes a little bit, but they're still a major user of rail movements in Michigan and throughout the country. Also primary metal products, so this is probably a lot of like steeled roll that comes into the state for automakers and the products that they make. Chemical products, transportation equipment, that's a lot of our inbound. Outbound, not surprising, transportation equipment, so these are a lot of finished vehicles that you see moving along our railways. Agriculture products is another big one with us being a big farming state. moving those products to other parts of the country is a big user of rail. Then primary metal, waste, and metallic ores, also a big user of rail here in Michigan. We added a little bit, if you wanted just to isolate Canada, if you're curious, with a lot of discussion on trade, we thought it might be interesting as well just to kind of see. You'll see that's a lot of mixed shipments that are coming out of Canada and going into Canada on our freight rail system. So that's something that, again, is a big piece of rail movements and where products going. We have a couple of programs that we use to really help support our shippers in Michigan and the rail industry. The first is what we call our Freight Economic Development Program. This is a program that's really focused on shippers getting access to rail here in Michigan. So this funds up to 50% of the infrastructure that would be required for a company to connect or add capacity for rail. So this could be a turnout from a main line and the development of a spur line that they use to load product and gain and access to that mainline railroad. It's something that we've done about 40 projects since fiscal year 20, and those projects have generated about 25,000 new carloads per year, supporting industries from agriculture to propane to forest products, steel, aggregates, plastics, automotive. So again, it's for us, I think, if you haven't heard, but essentially a rail car can handle about 4 truckloads worth of freight. So the more freight that we can get on a rail car as soon as we possibly can is really going to provide a benefit from a safety perspective compared to trucking on the roadways. Obviously, the wear and tear we can save by moving product to rail from roads is important. And there's also sustainability and resiliency efforts of having that rail mode of transportation available to our shippers. So something that's really important to us and we see as something that's growing here in the future. One example of a project that was just completed with the FEDP program, you'll see this was an expansion of rail into a facility, and there was also some investment around the facility as well that got them directly connected to the railroad. This was a box manufacturer over in Holland, Michigan. You see it's about a $1 million grant, but that led to the ability for that company to create 58 new jobs, 450 new rail carloads per year by directly connecting them to the rail network. Obviously, that's going to have a big impact. And all of those FEDP projects, we do basically carload reporting by that company to really make sure we get a good understanding of the impacts of those investments and how it helped lead that company to be more successful in their rail shipments. A second program we have is called the Michigan Rail Enhancement Grant Program, and this is a fairly new program. The first year we had funding for this was in fiscal year 23. This program is directed really to the railroads. It's a competitive program, and the railroads really can come to us when they're looking to expand capacity, to improve efficiency, to increase safety on their rail lines. This program really provides funding from the state to really help leverage those companies making those investments here in Michigan. We can cover up to 70% of the project cost under that program, but as you can see, we typically leverage about 50% matching costs from these companies since it is a competitive grant program. But it's something that's really had a big impact here in Michigan. We were able to, or we have awarded 34 projects since the inception in FY23. That's led to about $87 million in private investment in the railroad network. And again, these are investments that the railroad is making that will impact all the companies that ship on that line. So it could be, adding safety enhancements that let them operate more efficiently. It could be taking care of an infrastructure issue that's led to a slow order, meaning they can't operate at full speed on that line, or it could be adding capacity. So how do they increase access to rail or to increase their capacity in their network so they can serve more companies or transload facilities throughout the state? One example is we did do a grant to install some new wayside detection and automatic safety equipment. This was a project for one of our short line railroads here in Michigan. It included Saginaw, Oakland, Genesee, Alpena counties. So really a broad geography of where these investments would really have an impact. It was a relatively small grant, but really had a big impact on the ability for this short line railroad to operate efficiently and really to serve their customers in ways they hadn't been able to previously. The other way we really try to leverage investments in our freight rail network is through federal funding. And all of federal funding for rail is through competitive discretionary grants at the federal level. So there's no formula funding for rail that comes to Michigan from the federal government. We have been fairly successful in being awarded some of those discretionary grants, and we've really done that in two ways. One is MDOT's applied directly for funding to really help support our projects on our ownership where we need to make investments. But then we also, in a second way, partner with railroads that one either directly apply themselves, and we're able to offer some match support for those investments or those applications, or we partner with that railroad on a project that's submitted by MDOT, but that railroad is heavily invested in. And we were just awarded a grant for that. The last one on that list, the Livernois Yard Enhancement, is a project that we did in partnership with Norfolk Southern and the city of Detroit for our main intermodal yard in Michigan that's down in southwest Detroit. The top four on this list were all applications from private railroads that, again, we provided some match funding to help leverage that federal dollars. And then the ones with MDOT leading the title of the project, those were projects that we applied for directly and received funding. So luckily, we've been fairly successful in leveraging a lot of that federal funding. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of our freight rail and our maritime systems here in Michigan. I know John Poole is going to come up and share some further information on some of the freight rail from his members, but Alicia and I are certainly happy to answer any questions that any of the members have.
Thank you for that presentation. And I think that I'll start with questions with MDOT and then have John give his presentation. But if I could start, I'm curious on how many of the ports that the state of Michigan owns, and it's like you manage a lot for the ports, however, we only own a handful, and I'm curious on how many we own. So I'm just going to ask you like three questions, and then maybe you can just, that, and then like being that we're a budgetary committee, what is your line item budget portion of maritime? And I'll ask the same with you, Peter, with the freight. And then like FTEs with MDOT as well, too. So, and then when we actually own the ports, do we charge like a fee to people coming into our ports like a private vendor would as well, too? So if you could just expound on those.
Sure. No, those are great questions. Thank you for asking. So we actually, as MDOT, do not own or operate any of the ports in the state of Michigan. The only port that we provide 50% capital operating expenses to is the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority, because they are in law our only port authority in Michigan. So that would be the only line item in our budget, is that we provide 50% of their operating capital expenses, the other 50% coming from Wayne County and the city of Detroit. The others are all privately owned and operated, so they do generate their own revenue. The second piece of the question, I think I covered the line item. That's the only line item for MDOT's budget. I am our only person that solely works on maritime at MDOT. We do have a lot of folks that touch it in various aspects. So we have folks in our Office of Passenger Transportation office that work with the ferries quite a bit. We have folks that work with freight data specifically, where some of these commodity tables came from. So they work on maritime issues. Of course, our regions throughout the state of Michigan work with the ports when they're doing individual projects as well. So a lot of folks touch it, but I'm the only person that is sort of our go-to point of contact for maritime matters. And I guess that covers the FTE question as well, just me.
And then the dollar amount, do you know offhand for the Detroit port that we pay for as our 50%?
600,000.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Okay, thanks.
On the rail side, we have a few line items, but there's really two main ones. One's, I think it's titled Office of Rail. It's where basically our administrative, where our FTEs are. Our Office of Rail has budgetary authorization for 41 FTEs. We don't have all of those positions filled at the moment, but we're working on filling those vacancies. And then the second line, which houses most of our program funding, is our rail operations and infrastructure line. So that there's no FTEs attached to that, but that is where we fund our Amtrak operations, our freight grant programs, really all of the services and programming we have. So typically that's CTF funded, so Comprehensive Transportation Fund. So we get a piece of that, and our passenger transportation also utilizes that CTF fund as well.
And then I'm just going to ask one other question. We broke it up just as ferries and Amtrak, one presentation, and freight I just wanted to let the committee know that as well, that will be a future presentation from MDOT and other stakeholders, but this is clearly moving freight, not bodies and people. So, and the last question is, I know that we own a portion, we being the state of Michigan owns a portion of the railroads. Do we charge any of the freight companies to ride the rails, or is it just a service in which we provide?
So there's two different arrangements. So for all of the state-owned rail that we own, we have an operating agreement with the railroad, and that agreement allows that railroad to operate and essentially generate revenue on that line. What the state gets out of that is they're then required to maintain that railroad. So they're the ones that are then making investments to maintain the ties and those sorts of activities on the railroad. We also have railroads that utilize our lines that don't have that operating agreement. And they do have to pay us to basically, be able to utilize those lines. So we have those agreements with Norfolk Southern, with Watco, which is one of our short line railroads. So anywhere that there's interaction with the railroad where they're not one of those four operators, we do get revenue. It's not a lot of revenue, but it does help us maintain, the tracks that we own.
Thank you. And then Rep. Slaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of my questions is the 665 miles of state-owned corridor. Why is it that we do own railroad corridor, but not all of it, or how is it that we've come into this place where we've got some that's ours, some that's not, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so really there's two reasons. The first reason, and the railroad we've owned the longest, is really because that's some pretty low density rail line, and it's just not economically viable for the private sector to have ownership of that to make money. It was important for the state to continue to want to serve the customers and shippers that utilize that railroad. So that's how we came into ownership of a lot of it, especially in northern Michigan, some of that lower density area. The second reason is that we own what we call, again, the Michigan line, which is our main passenger rail line between Kalamazoo and Dearborn. Is really, we had a vision of moving to high-speed rail here in Michigan for our passenger service, which required a higher level class of railroad to be maintained. And it was essentially about the 2010s, we purchased 140 miles from Norfolk Southern. That really, they didn't have an interest in that. They just, wanted to maintain it as a freight railroad. So that purchase allowed us to basically operate our Amtrak service at higher speeds and really give us a little bit more control and priority on that railroad.
And then one other question. It was interesting that as you were talking about the freight program, the economic development side of that, and you had mentioned that there were over 2,500 new carloads per year as traveling down those tracks because of the upgrades and whatever else you had done. But is that 1% increase? Is that a 5%? I mean, how many cars do we have that are traveling down the tracks? Because this only gives me an idea of what's new, right?
Yeah, I don't know that overall number. And again, most of that network's operated by the private railroads, and they don't necessarily want to share a whole lot of data with us. I don't know if that's a number you know, John, just the overall carloads. Okay. So I think, we've got data on tonnage and value, but specific carloads is not data that we have access to from the private side.
So what you're telling me is I need to work over John Cool when we get done. Okay, got it.
I told John he was getting all the hard questions. So.
Oh, no, we'll bring you guys back up later. And I'm just gonna ask one other question. And then refer to Rep. Morgan, but how are we in comparison to other states moving our commodities across the state and interstate? Are we good? Are we below average? I'm curious because I first of all, I didn't even know we did this at the state level, so this is really great news that we have other ways of shipping other than our trucks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of advantages to Michigan. A lot of states don't have 4 Class 1 railroads that serve them, so I think that's a little bit of reflection of our manufacturing history that we have here in Michigan, that we made products and we needed them moved. On the flip side of that is we are a peninsula, so a lot of other states, they do have a lot of activity. But that's because the railroads are passing through, or it's more on a direct line to create, large intermodal transload facilities. So it's a little bit of a blessing of what we do here in Michigan and what we have. But being a peninsula and those lines that go to Traverse City and Petoskey, at some point there's the end of the road, right? And you may only be serving one customer. And other states sometimes don't have that challenge. But I think just because we have a lot of freight to move, we're pretty well served by the rail industry, and I would say we're, very competitive as a state with what we have as assets and utilization of rail.
My question was asked and answered, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. And if we need to, and if we have time, we could maybe have you guys step back up if there's other further questions after. We have a testimony from John Cool, who He is the Michigan Railroad Association, and he will be discussing economic and safety benefits of freight rail, 2, the rail improvement programs and local partnerships, and 3, the ongoing and future grade separations. So thank you, Mr. Cool, for coming, and begin when you're ready.
I'm looking for help on changing the PowerPoint slide to my slides. There we go. Thank you, Jake. Good afternoon. My name is John Cool, President of the Michigan Railroads Association. Glad to be here today to talk about moving freight and, yes, safety as well. We always are going to talk safety as part of this presentation or any presentation. The photos on this slide are taken just outside of Lansing at the State Police Hazmat Training Facility. It's where firefighters from across our state, hazmat specialists across the state, receive specialized training on rail cars. This is a facility that the rail industry helped fund and build in 1990. And every year since, our local firefighters, hazmat specialists have come to this facility to receive great training. The railroad industry participates with state police, who are a very strong partner in this effort. And we also have people coming in from out of state that come to this facility because it's a top-tier training facility. So I wanted to mention that. Rep. Morgan, a couple years ago, was part of a group that came out. Thank you for coming out that day. And is maybe it was a historic visit for a state legislator when we were trying to take a photo at the end of the tour, maybe climbing on a rail car a little bit. But it worked out in the end, so it was a good tour. I also want to mention new FRA data that speaks to the safety of the industry overall. So as we talk about all the product that has moved across our state, how well the job do we do? So these are national new numbers from the FRA. Industry-wide, derailments per million train miles fell 40% over the last 20 years. So that's nationally derailments down 40% in the last 20 years. Last year, 2024, was the second lowest on record for the industry during that time period. Hazmat accident rates have declined 80% since 2005. Recent years have had the lowest rates as far as hazmat releases on a rail car. More than 99.99% of all hazmat carloads shipped in this country arrive accident release free. So when we talk about what products are rolling through our communities, do we want certain products to move through our communities? Is it safe? It's very safe. We are the safest way to move goods on land, and that includes hazmat shipments. We are the safest way as an industry to move goods on land. So Peter had the railroads operating interstate. We're fortunate to have these railroads, the Class 1s and the short lines. That's a very big deal for our businesses, for consumers, for all of us. I also like to mention the compensation for a railroad career. It's hard work. A lot of it's outdoor work. In Michigan, it's cold outdoor work, sometimes 7 days a week. Evening shifts. It's not an easy career, but it pays well, and there's good benefits for a career in the rail industry. So I'd like to share that information. So it was mentioned earlier about private investment in this rail network, and that's very much true. This is not an inexpensive proposition. Privately owned railroads make significant investments every year: track upgrades, signaling, bridge work, ongoing mechanical and many different variations, technology advancements, the locomotives, the machine shops, everything that goes into running a railroad, moving these trains through Michigan, into Michigan, and across our nation is very expensive. And privately held railroad companies make huge investments into running these railroads. The freight moved in and out and through every carload, every rail carload, is about 4 trucks, 3 to 4 trucks off our highway system. So there's a tie-in there with the local or the recent conversation on road funding. local roads, our local systems, our local bridges. Every train, when you see these trains moving, think about every rail car, and you're going to get 3 to 4 18-wheelers equivalent. Now, we partner with the trucking industry. We love our friends in the trucking industry. We also compete every day with the trucking industry on a number of things. But that's the equivalent. If we can move it by rail, let's do it. We have capacity in the rail network to move these goods. So we move a lot of stuff. Some people step back and really think, what do these trains move? What are we moving on these trains? In Michigan, automobiles is a very big deal. Finished automobiles. We make a lot of them in Michigan, and a lot of parts coming into the state by rail. But right here in Lansing, we have a great example. Our downtown GM facility, the Grand River facility, we're making cars. And the Delta Township, just outside the city limits, a lot of automobiles are made. There's a rail yard right there. You probably see these rail cars. These are auto racks where, in this case, CN, but other railroads here in Michigan too, Norfolk Southern, CSX, are moving finished automobiles, great Michigan automobiles out of the state. Around 75% of all Michigan-made automobiles are moved by rail out of state. So when we talk about a strong rail network, it's very important to the auto industry that we have this network in place and that we are very good partners, vital partners, as far as the auto industry goes. The agricultural sector sends out a lot of commodity by rail and receives a lot of product that is needed on our fields. In the case of this photo with the boxcars, we have intermodal yards in Michigan. And you see these big boxes coming into the state. And you think, next time you see these rolling by on a train, just think that the cell phone that you have in front of you right now, the TV that you have in your living room, the jeans you're going to put on this weekend, the appliances, furniture, building materials, anything that you can find in a Target, a Meijer, a big box store, an electronic, a sporting goods store. Maybe that item came into Michigan on one of these rail cars. Even UPS ships a lot by rail. So many different items. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, because I just saw another story on this morning also, the items that are shipped by rail, something that might be coming, looking forward, it might be in the MDOT budget at some point, is the potash facility in northern Michigan that's been in the news and maybe more than ever because of the national implications. But just this morning I saw a note at the federal level about the Michigan Potash Project is projected to produce the largest American-based source of high-quality potash fertilizer and food-grade salt using, the process is listed there, but at the federal level, they've recognized this facility. Track will have to go back in to serve that facility. And all these carloads, a lot of carloads leaving Michigan with potash, that's going to be a very big deal for the rail industry, for the state, and for the country. So the feds are looking at that as well. So a couple of these programs were mentioned earlier. I just have a couple cases to share to try to provide a little bit of background. And there was a great case that Peter did mention earlier with the FED program. And I'm also going to share a very neat story dealing with the FEDP. And that's in Rep. Borton's district. This is a company called Arauco, who was looking at 2018, 2019, building a huge particle board facility, a composite wood panel operation in Grayling. And they had plans for this huge facility that did not include rail at all. Not one bit. It was all going to be truck. The railroad, in this case, Lake State Railway, went in and had a conversation and said, well, let's talk about rail serving this facility. What would that mean to you? And there was an MDOT component because of the FEDP program was brought in. And after crunching numbers and having some great conversations, this huge particle board maker in northern Michigan, local jobs up there, built, and I'm going to tie into a question that was asked earlier about carloads and what does this mean. Every year, as far as the metrics here, every year since this facility opened its doors and started producing, carloads have gone up. Now, I don't have the percentages to share, percentage increase once a facility or year after year on the program, but every year this facility has grown. More rail car shipments because they contemplated rail and went with it, are being shipped out. So this is product leaving our state, and there's news that they are going to grow as well. So this facility has done great. They've increased every year, and maybe even more, which is a huge success story of what the FEDP can mean, and that's been a key part of the MDOT program, and we're thankful for that, and we'd like to, we look forward to a strong partnership going forward, connecting people. This is a program for rail shippers. So people that want to ship, that want to connect to the rail network, this is a program for them to look at, and we do enjoy sharing that story. Another item, the surface program, it's about 8 years in now. Maybe some of you drive over a rough crossing once in a while. I get phone calls once in a while. It's not the train running on the blacktop or the concrete. It's automobiles, it's trucks, it's snowplows, it's salt, sometimes even farm machinery that can harm, do damage at a rail crossing. So after years of discussion, about 8 years ago, this program was put into place, the local surface program, and it's been very successful. Every year, our local road authorities, our county and city road authorities, who have to be the applicant under this program, submit more requests than the program can fund, which it has been funded at $3 million a year since inception. So there's been more need for what the program can cover. It's been a very popular program with our local, and it's another nice tie-in with the focus on local roads, local systems. A lot of these cases where the crossing is fixed, upgraded, this is a before and after photo here in the Thumb region, it's tied in with the local road project. So they do both of them at the same time, and that's great when that happens. Last year, or in the current budget, last year the legislature and the governor agreed to a one-time $2 million additional amount for this program, so a total of $5 million. And even with the $5 million, there were more requests. Inflation, just like everything else, is we can't go quite as far with these projects, but there were more applications for projects than that $5 million could satisfy. So respectfully, we would ask if that $2 million additional general fund could be added to this program that's worked very well with our local road authorities. The last item I wanted to mention was the grade separation issue or program. Grade separations where we take the roadway under or over a rail line. And in Michigan, we certainly have some congested rail crossings. There's no question about it. There was good news this week. Probably the most talked about congested crossing in the state, the Allen Road crossing in Woodhaven. It's been talked about for decades. Finally, they started moving dirt this week, and so they're about ready to really make a difference with this project. It's a huge public infrastructure project, critical for that region, for people getting to work, for first responders, for school buses. We have a lot of business and communities that have grown up around some parts of the state where rail is and rail serves our customers. A lot of time, railroads are blamed for blocking crossings. That's because there is business. It might be automobiles that we made here in Michigan. It might be product coming in to our stores. It could be product coming into Michigan used for our water treatment plants. But in these congested crossings, maybe a grade separation project is worthwhile to think about. And so under this program, this grade separation program, it did become law a few years ago. A couple years ago, it's been debated for a handful of years. It's been discussed. So the legislature passed, governor signed it. We appreciate that very much. And there has been some funds deposited into this grade separation program. I believe it's a $10 million and then a $5 million last year, or current year budget, have been deposited into that program. And that's good. That's a good start. There have also been some earmarks that have kind of tracked along during the same time period where some specific projects, and those are congested rail crossings too, but some earmarks have happened in recent years. So in a way, it's been a little bit of a competitive situation of we were asked 5-6 years ago to put a program in law and then fund it. And then we were asked, don't go after earmarks. Don't try the earmark approach. So that's happened a little bit, but we would say going forward, looking forward on this with grade separations, because there are some that still, I get phone calls that are mentioned, Wixom, Plymouth, Taylor, Romulus, Monroe County has a couple that get mentioned. There's probably 5 to 8 out there. But going forward, if the state can contribute along with a federal grant and local and railroad money too, maybe there's some in the future that we could look at as far as the budget process goes. So I will wrap with that. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you for your presentation. And just a couple quick questions. The expansion of the Marshall, I think it's the Opal plant, was that an MDOT or was that an independent railroad expansion? And is it, because you talked about one on, I guess, Gaylord, Grayling, I get them mixed up, Grayling. And is that similar? And then is that one done?
The Marshall facility or project, that property is on a rail line, and that's great news. That's a huge industrial property that rail can serve, and hopefully it does someday. So I don't know exactly where the rail, if the state or the railroad or the customer, if it ends up being Ford or somebody else with the rail service needs, how the sidings, the spur, the infrastructure that will be needed there. I don't know exactly how that's going to happen ultimately, but it is on a rail line, and that's great news for Michigan.
I just remember it being part of the entire project was to expand that rail from when it was the MEDC allocated the funding for that. So I know that the road infrastructure was put in. I was just curious if that has been done.
I'm not sure if any, I'm unaware if any siding or spur has been built to date. Maybe MDOT can comment on that.
Yeah, has been no siding or rail work done related to that project, other than there was a culvert that was installed underneath the railroad, really for the drainage of that site. And that was, I guess, funded out of the project, not by MDOT at all. So to date, there hasn't been any investment in rail at that site other than that culvert work.
Okay. And then when we do the repair of the railroad crossings or the rail separation, are those end up being county projects? Are they MDOT projects, or are they independent rail projects? All three.
So typically the railroads would do those projects, but there's partnerships with the road authority. MDOT obviously is a funding source, so we're involved, but the work is typically done by the railroads on those projects at the crossings. Grade separations are entirely different. They're much more significant in cost, and it really would depend on where that grade crossing is. So the Allen Road is a local road, so that one's, I think, being led by Wayne County. There's another project on M85 in Trenton. That's a state trunk line. So MDOT's leading that project. So generally, whoever has jurisdiction over the road would be the most likely person to lead those grade separation projects.
And the funding for that Woodhaven project is being done through MDOT. Or are you guys facilitating that?
So the fund is appropriated through MDOT, and there were some earmarks that were also funded through MDOT. So we are a funding source in that project.
But the local road commission is actually doing okay.
Yes.
I see all the heads going up and down. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Rep. Robinson, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, John, for that presentation. But I wanted to ask you, I'm not even sure if you can answer this question, but I'm definitely blown away by some of these numbers you have on this one sheet. There's 1 ton, nearly 500 miles, 1 gallon of fuel. So I guess my question is there an uptick in more companies using rail as opposed to the trucks? And where are you in conjunction with a percentage as far as if the 100 things are delivered, how many are delivered by truck as opposed to rail?
Those numbers are always shifting. One year over another, the rail industry puts out carload numbers weekly. But one year over another, it could be, grain, ag, these different products. It's up and down. We compete, but we're good partners as well. I mentioned the intermodal facilities where these box cars come. Well, at the end, the truck needs to pick them up and take them to the Meyer distribution center or what have you. So there is a strong partnership on all this, trucking and rail. But if there's a specific item that you'd like me to look up,
No, I'm just, if I was a business owner, I would look at rail. I mean, because it was really impressive, the UPS, your UPS uses you, because that would be, well, it takes a little longer, right? But if UPS is using you to get the products to the homes, it's,
that's a great comment and lead. In the document in front of you, the brochure has every railroad's economic development contact with phone and email. So if there are any businesses in your districts, please share that document and have them consider rail, just like Arauco.
They would love to talk to those companies.
I'm glad I could help your PR firm today, so.
Appreciate that.
Okay, do we have any other questions at this time? Okay, so I really appreciate your presentation, both MDOT and the Railroad Association, and we hope to have more discussion on those who use the maritime as freight too. So the actual stakeholders who actually use the shipping ports to move freight as well too. And we're going to hear from them in the future. So I think that us being an economic hub in the state of Michigan, we have to make sure that we can move our freight appropriately. So with that, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the members of the committee. And at this time, Rep. Borton moves to excuse absent members. Seeing no objections, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. Do I hit my, yeah. And there being no further questions and further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned. And thank you.